Hi, my name is Chanel Anderson, and I will be presenting on How Much is Learning Measurement Worth? Article by Daniel Wagner, Andrew Babson, and Katie Murphy. Author's purpose. Throughout the global arena, government agencies, international organizations, donors, and private sector partners increasingly emphasize the need for timely and credible data on student learning that may inform the design of effective mechanisms to improve educational outcomes. With the large growth of large-scale educational assessments, LSEAs, throughout the world, there has been a concomitant increase in attention to the fiscal burden of assessments in low-income countries. The costs have often been borne by external funders such as bilateral or donor agencies, resulting in the common perception that this burden of investments in knowledge is rather minimal when compared to the large amount spent on education itself. There are many types of educational assessments. The first one is a national assessment. It evaluates all students in a national education system. Nearly all countries engage in some type of national assessment in order to ascertain whether desired and planned educational goals are achieved. Regional assessments measure students' learning across a group of countries, typically defined by a geographic region or a shared language. International assessments measure learning in multiple countries. Their aims include cross-national comparisons that target a variety of educational policies, provision of league tables that rank order achievement scores by nation or region or other variables, within-country analysis that are then compared to other countries that operate at a sub-national level. There are also hybrid assessments focused more directly on the needs of low-income assessment contexts, smaller, quicker, and cheaper. The idea behind them was to see whether LSEA methodologies could be reshaped into hybrid methods that are just big enough, faster at comparing, analyzing, and disseminating data, and cheaper in terms of personal and cost outlays. Researchers' findings. Cost-benefit analysis in educational assessment. In the early 1990s, a limited number of studies examined the costs and benefits of LSEAs. The results supported them for two reasons. One, their fairly low overhead costs in relation to the overall education budget, and two, the high potential benefits of LSEAs to yield accountable results. While the assessment field itself, whether in high or low-income countries, seems largely convinced by the importance of LSEAs, the total cost of assessments are becoming more clearly recognized as a serious obstacle for low-income areas. In countries with developing educational systems, scarce resources are better devoted to assessments directed at improving learning and teaching, where the returns on investments are likely to be higher. The average cost of an LSEA appears small relative to national educational budgets, less than 1% generally per national budget, and as low as 0.3%. However, such low percentages may not reflect the percentage of available discretionary budget. National learning assessments in developing or transition countries rarely employ complex measurement instruments because such countries rarely have the requisite domestic capacity or can afford to purchase expertise from abroad. In order to make a cost-based decision about assessment choice, it is important to bear in mind both overt and hidden costs that come into play in any assessment. Overt costs are those that are typically planned for in advance and that are included in accounting mechanisms of the agency or agencies in charge of the LSEA. These would include staff costs of test management, training, travel, supplies, and equipment. Looking at this chart here, we can see that we have the cost of test preparation, test application, processing and analysis, dissemination, institutional cost, testing fees, and others. We're looking at the national assessment, regional assessments, international assessments, and EGRA assessments. These are for different countries such as Honduras, Uruguay, Switzerland, Mexico, Panama. Looking at the totals down here, we can see that the national assessments are far more expensive than any regional or international assessments. It can go as high as $2.8 million. Intervention. The key issue here is not that the assessments are expensive or not, rather the issue is what a ministry or funding agency will receive in return for its investments. Evaluating and learning from assessments is fundamental to credible change in education systems from across nations. Learning what costs are associated with assessments will help schools, districts, states, etc. to be prepared for future assessments. LSEAs are typically not administered until children reach grade 4 or later, when children may be far behind in reading development. This can impose very high costs in remediation that early assessment could prevent. Catching up is expensive, difficult, and may lead to school failure, the most important cost that policymakers seek to avoid. How does this relate to the course? Stewart talks about the different kinds of assessments that are used in America and other countries around the world. He also says, we rely heavily on frequent, low-cost, multiple-choice tests, which tend to measure limited ranges of knowledge and skills and are of little help to teachers seeking to understand students' needs and tailor instruction accordingly. So we need to decide, are the testing prices worth it? Do we get the answers that we want? Or are we just putting our children through unnecessary stress? My overall impression of the article was that it was very interesting to see the costs that are involved in testing. As teachers, we know the assessments we are told to give our students and the ones we choose to give them to get the answers that we want, but we never consider the cost that goes along with them. Some seem more necessary than others, but they all give us some sort of data that is needed, either for ourselves, for our principals, or for our district.